Hello and welcome to the Daily Royal. My name is Shelby and I have been a royal watcher for the past 10 years. In this podcast, I talk about the daily events of 7 of the European monarchies. So I talk about Belgium, the UK, Denmark, the Netherlands, Norway, Spain, and Sweden. I upload Monday through Friday with occasional bonus episodes here and there. In today's episode, we are actually focusing on one specific series of events on July 22nd in Norway. Today was the 10th anniversary of a horrible terrorist attack in the country 10 years ago, and so today's episode is going to cover what that attack was, what the motivations were, and then dive specifically into how the royal family responded 10 years ago and what events took place specifically today to mark this occasion. I wanted to do an episode like this on this specific event for a couple of reasons. One, it is something that I wanted to do a good amount of research on and go in depth on, and spend some time, like a full episode's length of time talking about. So that's reason number one. Reason number two is some people may not want to listen to something that is so sad. And can be very triggering for people. And so I wanted to respect that as well, and keep this separate from the everyday episode. Of course, in the everyday podcast, we do talk about sad things, and that's something that is unavoidable, because I'm talking about real events every day. However, something this intense and this in-depth and researched is something that I don't think everyone will want to hear, and that's okay. For those of you who do want to hear it, thank you. And for those of you who don't, that's totally fine. It's just something that I really wanted to do and to share. So that is what we're going to do. So the schedule, it's not really a schedule, the outline for this is going to be broken down into 3 parts. A history of what the attack was, how the Norwegian Royal Family responded 10 years ago, and then the events. So there were a series of events today to commemorate the anniversary. So I want to talk about those. So that is what this episode is going to be. Please stick around if this is something you're interested in hearing in, and if not, thanks for going in this far, and I'll talk to you in the next episode whenever that may come out. It'll be at least after the weekend. Okay, so July 22nd, 2011, there was an attack, obviously, on Norway that was life-changing to everybody there. So there were 2 locations where this terrorist attack took place. In the Oslo city center, which, like, the government quarter of the city center, followed by an island called Utøya, which held a summer camp, essentially. And it was a right-wing extremist domestic terrorist who carried this out. I am not going to share his name. That information is widely available, but I am of the mindset of not giving attention to the names of these people and rather focusing on the event itself. Like, that's just something that is really important to me. So, he was a right-wing extremist who very much was a white nationalist, kind of. It's easy to say that, but Europe is a little different in their white nationalism in that it is white nationalism, first and foremost, but it's more directed at total nationalism, in that there's this argument throughout a lot of Europe that is everyday people did not invite or necessarily want, and this is a crap argument, but I'm just saying it so you understand the mindset, refugees or people, refugees specifically, to infiltrate their national beliefs. So this is a very far right, also far white idea, that is crap, but people have it. And this is what this guy believed. So, at the time, Norway was governed by a liberal party, the Labour Party in Norway. And so, this terrorist decided that an attack on the government quarter would cause essentially a coup, and have a new government be built with more nationalistic ideas. So he parked a van with a bomb inside and blew up. I believe the main building it was parked right outside of was the Prime Minister's office building. However, the Prime Minister was not in the physical office. He was at home in his residence doing something. I think a meeting is what I've seen portrayed, but I'm not sure if that's what was actually occurring. And there were a few casualties there. And any is, of course, too many. But it was a relatively, given the horrible it could have been, it was a less horrible. It was still terrible, but it was a less horrible thing, I guess. And then this man drove a different vehicle to a campground on the island of Utøya, pretending to be a police officer after the Oslo bombing to protect the children. Well, they weren't children, because this was a camp for young members of the Labour Party, future leaders, young members of the Labour Party, which is a thing I did not know until today. I kind of just always assumed it was like a teenage summer camp, which to some degree it was, but there were people, like young adults there, really taking part in this working party ideas and just being part of that culture and learning new things and developing their skills and just really becoming a member of that political party. And so this man somehow managed, because he was dressed as a police officer, to trick the camp director into having him take the ferry to the island, where he then shot and killed dozens of young people. Young, political-minded people. And he was arrested on site, has never denied doing it. And it was pretty atrocious, obviously. And so that is what the attack was. Altogether, 77 people lost their lives. And later, it was shared that 1 in every 4 Norwegians knew someone impacted by the Oslo and Utøya attacks. Which is, I mean, Norway is small, so it's not a shocking number, but it is hugely impactful. And then as a whole, even 10 years ago, a fairly liberal country in terms of acceptance, and extremely welcoming to refugees. Everyone was shocked. So, that was the attack. The next thing I wanted to talk about was the royal family's response. So, the night of, this was, it's summertime. If you guys are daily listeners to this podcast, you know that by now it's very slow. It's a very slow period of time. Royal families are on vacation. They're taking their summers. And that's what was happening. So the royal family was not in Oslo. They were out doing summer holiday things, but by the night of the 22nd, it was reportedly super late at night. I don't know the time exactly. King Harald made his first statement where he expressed shock in support of the victims and the families, and was really just rattled and talked a lot about freedom. And that was his initial response. And then in the coming days, there were many things that were happening. Church services, candlelight vigils, I think they called it I think it was called a rose parade, but it was a memorial. They just attended a ton of things, candlelight services, so many different things. Visited with survivors, visited with victims' families, did all of the things that people come to expect of royals after tragedy. However, a few days later, so on the 25th, the attack was on the 22nd. On the 25th, the Norwegian royal household announced that the security guard of the camp, who was one of the first killed on the island, was actually Crown Princess Mette-Marit's stepbrother. So I do not want to speculate on their relationship. Honestly, nothing has ever really been shared about what their relationship was. But this is someone who, of course, she knew by nature of her mother being married to his father. And that level of connection, whether, they maintained a relationship or anything like that, I'm not going to say. But that kind of connection is very rare in a royal family to have someone experience. And that just really speaks to this fact that, 1 in every 4 knew someone. And I think that gave it a level of connection in terms of sometimes you can feel so deeply of empathy for a thing. Like I, for example, feel an immense amount of empathy for this situation. It brings me to tears. It's horrible. But I don't know anyone, right? So I am removed from the situation. In this case, Mette-Marit really couldn't be any kind of detached. There was no detachment. And so I think that gave it a whole new level of like, not that it needed more level of emotion, but it gave it more. And it was, of course, highly impactful, and made international news that a relative of the royal family was a victim of the attack. That being said, families were suffering everywhere. Survivors were struggling with trauma and all of this. And it rattled Norway. If you're from the States, you know what it feels like. If you're of a certain age, you know what it feels like to be rattled by something like this. And the domestic side, in the States at the time, really the worst thing we had experienced was, of course, 9/11, and that is still horrible and terrible. But I would argue that the domestic stuff of late has been harder, because it isn't this some great unknown, right? It's people we grew up with, coming and killing people in the streets or storming the Capitol building, because they don't like certain beliefs and certain ideas. And to some, that can be extremely rattling. This is not something I'm going to share now. And I think I've briefly mentioned, but I experienced something like this, not to this extent, of course. But for those of you who are from the States, the Charlottesville white nationalist rally, I was living in Charlottesville at the time, was not at the rally or anything like that, but still to this day struggle with crowds and groups because of PTSD. So, this happened to an entire nation with this, because this is very much a minority way of thinking in Norway. And so it rattled everybody. So that was the initial response. There were continued anniversaries I think it was a month later, there was a national memorial held, very similar to one that happened today, where King Harald gave a speech. And I think this is the speech where he, with tears in his eyes, talked about how Norway accepts and loves everybody, regardless of anything. And, people to this point, everyone still assumed that, royalty was stiff upper lip and, never let emotions show, which to some extent is still true to this day, but not in Norway. that barrier was fully broken this day with King Harold, Queen Sonia. I mean, everyone was crying for for obvious reason. And it is a thing that has carried on. Like, I have seen that speech many times, because it's so impassioned and very much politically neutral while rejecting the fringe idea of nationalism, which carried even now into today. So today, being the 10th anniversary, there was a day full of events. There were a lot of events happening today that we'll talk about. But the main overarching theme was continuing to weed out this hate for people and live in an accepting, loving Norway. So, today's events started with Crown Prince Haakon and Crown Princess Mette-Marit at a memorial service in the government quarters of Oslo, which of course was the site of the first attack. They pretty much throughout all of the events, the current Prime Minister of Norway attended, as well as the leader of like the working party group that hosted the camp at Utøya. So not the leader of the Labour Party, but like an in the weeds organizer person, like on a national scale for the working party. So they attended this event. It was, and all of these were combinations of speeches, musical interludes, and reading of victims' names, and wreath-laying ceremonies. So the first event was, of course, at the government quarter. Then the next thing, King Harold and Queen Sonia attended a service at the Oslo Cathedral, also attended by the Prime Minister, I believe. There isn't a ton of, I didn't watch this one, and the few minutes I did see of the service, I did not see the current Prime Minister. That does not mean she wasn't there. It just means I did not see her. And so this was, of course, a Church of Norway service to mark the anniversary, pray for the victims, pray for the survivors, and in general, Norway, having survived this horrible thing, and now 10 years on. So then we go to the island of Utøya, where Crown Prince Haakon, Crown Princess Mette-Marit, and their daughter, Princess Ingrid Alexandra, attended that ceremony. So they took the ferry across to the island. There is a commemorative memorial that has the names of all the Utøyan victims. It's called Lisningen. So everyone, when they were departing the boat, the ferry, were given bouquets of flowers to lay at this memorial. So there were survivors here, members of the Labour Party and the AUF, which is that working party. And then there was, again, another sit-down speeches and musical interludes. Akun gave a speech during this time where he talked about Utøya and the attack, and talked about this is again a working AUF camp. It is a camp for Labour Party future leaders. It is a way to, it was just turned into what it was. They came back and did the thing. And he talks about at the very end. He says, quote, "I am afraid that we as a society have not been good enough to listen and make room for all the emotions, all the traumas this day has given. I hope that this decade mark can help us find the right words, the right language, so that we can move forward." And I think it is hard to talk about things like this. It is very easy to not talk about them and to internalize them and even just forget they happened. Because talking about it and confronting it, and especially in this type of situation where it's a domestic attack based on political beliefs, that is very hard. It is hard to, one, understand that way of thinking that would lead to something like this, and then two, learn how, figure out within yourself what you can do to combat that. And I think that comes with time. In war-torn countries or countries that have had civil wars, they don't deal with it for decades or even centuries because dealing with it is painful. And only generations on can you kind of grapple with something that big. It's not the way it should be, but it's certainly the way it is. And so I think a decade mark is a good time to remember. And really, if you were, alive and were scared during that time, you can certainly sit down and think about it. And if you were young, you have these budding, beautiful, wonderful ideals of the world that this doesn't match with, and you can sit down and go, what can we do to be better? And I think that's right. Generations on from this attack, people will look at it and go, what can we do to be better? And so I think that's what this alludes to is that. So that was the ceremony on Utøya. And then the day concluded with a ceremony much like the one on the month anniversary of the attack in the Oslo Spectrum, which is a kind of the large arena area that was attended by the entire royal family. So King Harald, Queen Sonja, Crown Prince Akun, Crown Princess Mette-Marit, Princess Ingrid Alexandra, and Prince Sverre Magnus were all there. And this was very much a ceremony combining the darkness of that time with the duty to continue and fight back against this kind of hatred, xenophobic, you name it, attitude that is just fundamentally wrong. And really bringing a voice to this event. So King Harald gave a speech at this event as well, talking about light being stronger than darkness, and how out of this horrible tragedy, there has been good, and not that that's a reason, right? Like, I don't mean, oh, there's good in the bad. Like, yes, but he also then talked about the survivors and what they're doing now, 10 years later, and what they are so committed to making Norway wonderful for everyone. And so that's what he's talking about. Like, the light in this is stronger than the hatred of this one man and these fringe thinkers that still exist in Norway. And so that was the day today. And I just want to say very quickly, I will probably talk about this maybe a little bit longer in another context, but to see the entirety of the 3 generations of, current monarch and the 2 future monarchs of Norway coming together and being as affected by this as the next. King Harald still extremely affected by this. Crown Prince Haakon was visibly affected a couple of times, and so was Ingrid Alexandra. And knowing that Haakon is going to take this spirit with him when he becomes king, and Ingrid Alexandra is going to take that spirit and remembrance and the emotions that this day brought out in her into her role, is, to me, hopeful. Just in that, while not political, they have very clearly stood against hate and xenophobia and all the things, and they have stood against this nationalist idea of not allowing refugees into this wonderful country that Norway is. They have flat out said in their words and actions today, like, no, this is not who we are. And I think that's really powerful and really important. So I just want to end on that, tie it all up with a royal related bow. Not a pretty one. It was an ugly day. And just say, please do some research on this if you can. I strongly recommend, there is a movie on Netflix that I did not know existed until today. It's called 22 July, and it is all about this event, and it's in English. It's on Netflix. It is very accessible, and it gives a really good dramatized, well, maybe, yes, it's a docupic. It's based on the event. It gives a very good overview, plus is good of the whole event. It will make you cry, or at least it made me cry. But it's super powerful, and I would strongly recommend watching it. So anyway, that is it for this special focused episode. I will be posting regular content online on the website, thedailyroyal.com, and the Instagram account, thedailyroyal. You can see pictures of these events that I'm talking about today, as well as the other things that have happened today throughout the royal households. I will be recording an episode probably on Sunday is my expectation. There have been a couple of things that have happened today, and then there will be some things at least on Sunday. I'm not sure what tomorrow looks like yet, and won't know until it happens. And so I'll just record on Sunday, and we'll talk more then. But for now, have a wonderful weekend, and I will talk to you all on Monday. Bye.